Morning, everyone. Thank you for all coming. I hope you've had a chance to get some coffee or tea or something. I know it's still pretty early. I want to be sure to thank the folks and the organizers from Pi Gotham as well. This is my first time here, and I'm super excited to be here. And I'm pretty sure this is going to be an awesome couple of days. So, I really look forward to spending it all with you. I'm going to be speaking today about open source sustainability, which is a phrase you might have heard, maybe not, but I want to speak about it specifically through the lens of Python and what open source sustainability means for Python. So real quick about myself, who am I? My name is Keenan Szulik. I'm a product manager at Tidelift. I'm also a data scientist, which was my introduction to the Python community, actually. And another question is, why am I here speaking about this today? Well, over the past 2.5 years, I've had the opportunity to work on this problem of open source sustainability every single day. And I've gotten to speak to hundreds of open source maintainers from JavaScript to Python, .NET, Java, Ruby, all these various communities about the challenges of supporting their open source work combined with their day jobs and all the needs that their users have. And so I'm hoping to talk today about just some of the things that I've learned in the past 2.5 years. So how many of you all have heard the phrase open source sustainability before? Does that mean? Okay, perfect. As you may have learned, whether through seeing on Twitter discussions or news articles or Hacker News or something, there are a lot of different meanings for open source sustainability. It means a lot of things to a lot of people. So I want to level set before I get started about how I will be referring to open source sustainability today. The present dialogue around open source sustainability largely was reignited in 2016 by the Roads and Bridges report, which was written by Nadia Eghbal and supported by the Ford Foundation. And so what Nadia did was compare the physical infrastructure of our world, the literal roads and bridges, right, to the digital infrastructure of the software world, which is open source software. And Nadia did a really good job of pointing out how open source has become ubiquitous, right? It's impossible now to develop software without relying on open source code. But what she also compelled readers to do is think about how we are financially supporting that software so that it doesn't crumble, just like we are supporting our physical infrastructure. On a very specific example, Nadia pointed to the OpenSSL project, right? A huge open source project critical to global security for hundreds of millions of users. And she cited the recent Heartbleed vulnerability. This was back in 2016, that was one of the most severe vulnerabilities to date. And she asked, how did this happen? And the reality was that OpenSSL was being maintained by one full-time developer working at a well below market salary. And this is one of the most important open source projects in the world. There is no way that one person could do this all on their own. That is hardly the care that this critical software deserves, and that's what it was left to. And so since 2016, this phrase open source sustainability has come up a lot more, right? In the last year alone, TechCrunch and Vice and other popular publications have published front page articles asking how do we sustain open source. And they are all centered around that financial component, right? How do we financially support the open source maintainers and developers building this infrastructure we depend on? And so when I talk about open source sustainability today, that is the lens that I will use, is how do we financially support the open source software that has become the underpinnings of our digital world? And so the first thing I want to address is, why is this important for Python, right? This might seem obvious, but it's worth noting, which is that the Python ecosystem is growing fast. Looking at this data from libraries.io about the number of packages on the Python packaging index, we can see that in 2015, there were barely 50,000. And today, there are over 200,000 Python packages that are published on PyPI. So that is to say that Python is growing faster than ever. and there are more Python packages than ever. And the next logical question you might ask is, how many of these packages are actually being used? And it turns out a lot. There are over 1,600 Python packages that were downloaded over 1 million times in the last year. 1,600. There are over 400 that have been downloaded at least 10 million times, and about 50 that have been downloaded over 100 million times in the last year. So if we were to take an estimate of like how many Python packages are really critical, that really, really need to be sustained for the state of our software going forward, it's probably in the hundreds, right? Hundreds, maybe 1,000 really, really important packages. That's a lot. And just to name a few names that you're probably familiar with, some of these packages with over 100 million downloads are things like Six and NumPy, Flask. Some of the packages with 10 million downloads are packages like Flake8, scikit-learn, or pipenv. And those with about 1 million downloads or more are packages like PyLDAP, Shade, and PyTest Flask. So all of this is to say that there are hundreds or thousands of critical Python libraries built mostly by volunteers in their free time that we need to support going forward to have a healthy ecosystem. And that's not even to mention CPython, right? The Python programming language itself that I imagine we're all users of, and PyPI and community events. There's all this stuff that we need to support to have a healthy community. So the next thing I want to address is how has Python and the Python ecosystem sustained itself so far? Well, rather uniquely, the Python community has a number of really prominent foundations, and they play a really big role in supporting the community at large. The first of which, of course, is the Python Software Foundation, right? The PSF. So the PSF has the mission to promote, protect, and advance the Python programming language. And how do they currently do so? Well, predominantly the PSF leads and funds PyCon, right? The majority of their expenses go to funding PyCon, and if you haven't been, I highly, highly recommend it. It is amazing. But the PSF also does other programs. They provide grants to selected initiatives. They support regional PyCon events. And they recently started a fiscal sponsorship program for select libraries. And so what that means is that the PSF allows for earmarked donations to go to specific projects where the maintainers of those projects can use those donations however they see fit. This is a pretty new initiative, but it's really exciting. Also, if you haven't read it, the PSF annual report is a thing of beauty, and I highly recommend checking it out because they put a lot of effort into it, and you can really see the work that goes into sustaining the broader Python community. Taking a screenshot from that, right, there's about 75% of the PSF's funds go to PyCon. We also see, they use a large percentage of their income on grants and community awards and their new fiscal sponsorship program. This is really cool. Also worth noting is something amazing that the PSF does, which is they dedicate their resources across the globe, right? They do such a good job of spreading Python internationally and not just focusing on one location that it's really, really impressive. And it really speaks to the power of what the PSF is doing. Another prominent foundation within the Python community is called NumFocus. For those of you who don't know it, it is focused largely on the Python scientific computing community and the data science community. So what NumFocus does is it has the mission of promoting open practices in research, data, and scientific computing. Notably, NumFocus provides fiscal sponsorships for dozens of critical Python libraries. So if you're a data scientist and you use NumPy or SciPy, Pandas, or Matplotlib, NumFocus is the fiscal sponsor and supporter of all of these really, really important projects. And if we dive into a portion of their annual report, we can see exactly how that fiscal sponsorship manifests itself. You can see exactly how much funding they have available for each project at any given time, what the balance of that project is, and they really do a good job of being transparent about where all of their sponsored projects stand. Money that these projects earn from NumFocus goes to things like ongoing maintenance of the project, sponsored development sprints, or co-locating the teams all together because open source is developed asynchronously and remotely. So the rare occasion that they can bring everyone together is really powerful and hard to achieve. And the last foundation I want to mention today is the Django Software Foundation. So the DSF backs, surprise, the Django web framework. And they have the mission of advancing, promoting, and supporting Django. How does the DSF do this? Well, they have an annual fellowship, which is really, really unique and really, really cool. They currently are fundraising for about $200,000 for their annual fund to support what's called the Django Fellows, which is such an interesting way to support the project. So the Django Fellowship began in 2014, and what they do is they pay for full and part-time maintainers of Django to continue working on the project. Those maintainers focus primarily on weekly ticket and issue triage, community support, code review, PR merges, and security patches. And I want to say this is really, really unique. Not many open source projects have a setup like this where they have dedicated full-time paid maintainers. And it showed, right? The Django continues to be an important part of the Python ecosystem. Companies continue to rely on it. End users continue to have easy onboarding experiences. And that's a really powerful illustration of what a full-time paid maintainer can do for a project. But it's also amazing to think that Django has been doing this for 5 years with basically one person. For a software project that's as big as that is, that's hard to do. So it is really, really amazing what the DSF has done with the Django Fellows program. Looking now at an additional model of how Django projects in the Django community, or the Python community has supported itself, there's Django REST Framework, which has used a paid support for a single project model. So the origin of this is that Django REST Framework and the lead maintainer, Tom Christie, knew that the project was important to end developers and to companies that were relying heavily on their work. And so what they wanted to do was dedicate themselves to working full-time on the project. So they started charging for a monthly paid support subscription, where a company could pay the monthly fee, and they would then be awarded priority issue response time, 24-hour SLAs to issues raised by customers. And this has worked really well for Django REST Framework. The lead maintainer has worked on the project full-time for the last few years and been super successful with it. What has that led to? Well, at a high level, it's led to better software, right? More frequent, higher quality releases, improved documentation, which is absolutely critical to the success of an open source project, is good documentation. Put quantitatively, it's led to about 80 to 90 issues and PRs being closed each month for the project, which benefits not just those paying customers, but also all users of Django REST Framework. And also worth noting is that this paid maintainer working on the project has been a strong signal of the future of Django REST Framework, that it will be continually supported and continually sustained, which cannot be overlooked, right? The fact that as a developer, you can choose an open source project and know that someone will work on it into the future and that you won't have to support any technical debt if they leave the project is a huge weight lifted off your shoulders. And this is why companies would be willing to pay for support for a project like this, for that assurance. Another popular model that is commonly used to sustain open source work is the donation model, tip jars, right? So one popular player in this space is known as Open Collective. And Open Collective defines itself as an organization for your community, transparent by design. It allows individuals and companies alike to transparently donate to any projects or organizations that are on Open Collective, including some popular Python ones like PyTest and Falcon, or an organization like Michigan Python. And Open Collective has had various degrees of success with different types of projects, but most notably, popular JavaScript projects like Babel and Webpack have been able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations on Open Collective. They're a real testament to how working hard for that donation can actually work really well for an open source project. Then another popular and newer sustainability model is actually GitHub Sponsors, which launched earlier this year and is still in beta. So you might have seen something like this on the repositories of a popular project on GitHub, right? It's like a little badge with a heart that says sponsor next to it. And so what GitHub Sponsors enables you to do is, as an individual, you can donate directly within the GitHub UI to the maintainer of an open source project that you like or that you use. And it's a really fluid, really easy process straight within GitHub. GitHub also partners with other sustainability efforts so that if an open source maintainer has a different preferred means of accepting income, they can use that instead. For example, Open Collective or my company Tidelift, which I'll get to in a minute. GitHub doesn't take any processing fees on any donations, and they're currently doing a matching program. So if you donate to a developer, they will double whatever you donate. One other thing that I love that GitHub does is that they encourage you to not just think of the creators of open source as being software developers, right? But they highlight designers or documentation writers or all other contributors and say, these people are critical to open source too. You should support them if that's what you want to do. And the last model I want to discuss is probably one that's a little less familiar by name, but that I bet you'll be more comfortable with it if I describe it a bit, which is called managed open source. And so this is the effort that my company Tidelift is currently partaking on. And the idea is that we want to provide this managed open source service across all of your open source dependencies backed directly by project maintainers. And that's how we will help open source become more sustainable. So what is managed open source? Well, if you're familiar with Red Hat or Red Hat Enterprise Linux or MongoDB or Anaconda, what Tidelift does is something similar to them, where we cover all of the open source dependencies that you would use for your building an application, and we help provide enterprise-grade versions of those that are supported by the maintainers, so that as a company, you know that you're using the best, safest versions of your dependencies. On the back end, we partner directly with and pay hundreds of independent open source maintainers. So the key to that is the fact that Tidelift is backed directly by those maintainers. And I can't stress it enough. That is the real key to what we're trying to do, because it's partnering with these maintainers that enables Tidelift to provide value to users, and it's what helps us sustain their ongoing maintenance work on their open source projects. We're still pretty young, but I'm really excited to get to work on this problem every single day. And so for some perspective, this graphic represents a handful of the overall projects that are supported on Tidelift right now, directly by the maintainers of those projects. There are a ton of Python maintainers working with Tidelift already, and these are just a few of the ones you might recognize, right? If you're a data scientist, NumPy and Pandas might stand out. If you're a web developer, you might see names like Flask or Coverage.py, Colorama. We have started working with all of these maintainers to help them support their work. And also worth noting is that we're trying to meet projects where they are. If they're an individual developer, great, we'll work with them. If they're a team of maintainers, or if they work through a foundation, great, it's even better. We're happy to work with projects however is best for them. And so, because I know this example really well, I'd love to tell you a little story about a project called Celery. I guarantee you that a number of people in this room have used Celery. It's a pretty popular package, distributed task queue. And it's about 10 years old, and for the majority of its history, Celery was developed by one lead maintainer. This person did the vast majority of all commits on the project. But in 2017, that maintainer got stricken with a bad case of burnout and eventually left the project because they felt they couldn't work on it anymore. And so this absolutely critical Python library nearly became unmaintained. Fortunately, a couple other developers stepped up and decided working on the project. And in 2018, they became one of the first projects to start working with TideLift. Today, Celery is earning about $1,500 a month on TideLift, and that income has really helped the maintainers dedicate more time out of their day jobs to spend working on the project and supporting users. So to put that quantitatively, that's about 200 issues and PRs that they have been able to close in the last 6 months alone, which for a small library, or not small, but not a massive framework like Django, for a library like Celery, that is a huge deal. And this is an important point, is that I view this example as real proof that paid maintenance, sustained paid maintenance on a project, whether it's a huge project like Django or a slightly smaller one like Celery, has real value. It really helps the users of the project, it helps the maintainers, and it makes everyone better. So I'd like to finish off by going back to how we started, which is, what is open source sustainability? And I want to ask you all to think, is sustainability the right question? Is sustainability the goal? Is that enough to make open source sustainable? Is it enough to just financially sustain those projects? To which I would say no. Sustainability is not the goal. That's not nearly enough. And I personally hate the phrase open source sustainability because that goal is far, far too low. We should be aiming to make open source this awesome industry where developers can dedicate their full selves to the projects. And I want you to just imagine a world where these creators of these open source projects could spend their full days contributing to the open infrastructure that powers our world, not just their nights and weekends, and they could be handsomely rewarded for it. Because that's the future that would provide the greatest benefit to our community, to our software, and to our world. That's the future that I'm hoping we can build and that I would love to see. So if you'd like to discuss any of this, if you have any questions, I'll be here all weekend and would love to talk to anyone about it. If you maintain a Python library or you think this could be valuable for your company, please come and talk. Thank you.